Welcome to another episode of ExecuBalance. Thank you for joining me today as we dig in and try to find different tips and tricks from some busy executives on how they balance their life. My name is Chad Crow. I'm the host of the podcast as well as CEO of Techwood Digital. I'm a father of 4 and a husband to 1, and so I know what it's like to have to struggle to find balance. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome. I'm here today with Hans Rueffert, a good friend of mine from the past. Hans is a chef, a cancer survivor, most notably a creator of an amazing spice line, and a recipe book artist. So a lot of things going on. It's so great of you to take some time to come join us, Hans. Thank you so much.
Anytime you ask me to do anything, Chad, I pretty much say yes. I think if you think back far enough, you know.
Absolutely. So the way I like to jump into these is in a way for people to get to know you more is just kind of let's run through some of the life roles that you've had the opportunity to play. And I'm just thinking there's so many. So
well, and I do often say I'm kind of the jack of all trades, master of none. I was born into a restaurant family, and so literally lived 13 steps above a fairly well-known restaurant in North Georgia. It was called the Woodbridge Inn, right in downtown Jasper. So from the age of 4 on, I was a dishwasher, busboy, oyster shucker, pretty much whatever needed to happen. In a family business, you just do whatever needs to happen. So I think I was either blessed with or cursed with that work ethic that I always have to be doing something. So from that, just trying to condense this, ended up in the television world, which is where I met you, doing a cooking show and then hosting a daily news show. And that circumnavigously brought me to the Next Food Network Star. I was on season 1 of the Next Food Network Star. And then, gosh, I guess from there landed the role as dad. If you jump back a couple of years, which is, as you know, one of the hardest roles, but most important roles. And then in 2005, diagnosed with stomach cancer. Been told 3 times that I'd be dead by morning, but I'm stubborn enough to not listen to that advice. So yeah, it's been a crazy run. I think people most associate me with food in some capacity. And so I've been using that in my current role as a bit of a platform, trying to make people be aware of that connection between what they eat and how they feel, and what responsibility they have towards their own health, which I know can be boring, but I try to make that as user-friendly and as exciting as it can be.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think I met you kind of just post-diagnosis, actually. And so I just remember that being a time when lots of several roles that you had at the same time just kind of all collided, and the role of surviving became a main role. I would love to talk a little bit more about kind of that time and how that felt, and how did the people around you, how did things balance out for you when you had to focus most on your health?
Well, I mean, just to set that up, I mean, it happened literally 2 weeks after the finale of the Next Food Network Star. So from a career point of view, I think I was at, some could say, the apex. I mean, I had this national attention. We were just doing well. I think I was even though I didn't win that competition, there were a lot of things happening because of that opportunity.
And for the record, you came in 3rd, right?
Came in 3rd, yeah, out of 10. So that's a whole other story for another podcast. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, it was a great experience. Made a lot of great lifelong friends from that. And I feel like I held my own. And pretty much everybody that did something with that show went on to do other things. And I was on that trajectory as well, and was diagnosed with stage 3B stomach cancer. And if you're not familiar, that's about as bad as it can get without it being, where they're saying this is the end. I was 1 lymph node away. And, prior to this experience, I had lost my sister to breast cancer just about a year prior to my diagnosis. And even though that was so close, I still had no real education in that entire world of hospitals and cancer, and there's a whole language you have to learn going into that. So my attention absolutely, it was the day before my 33rd birthday. I was diagnosed with stomach cancer, and I didn't know anything about stomach cancer. I didn't know anybody with stomach cancer. I didn't really know that that was a thing. And then, the irony of a chef with stomach cancer didn't, get lost on me. And I think it was sort of everybody's assumption, well, what did you eat? Because I am kind of known to eat weird things. Is it something that I did, that caused that? But I think it was just more like getting struck by lightning. But yeah, having to shift the focus from, professionalism to now survivorism, if that's a word, was definitely a hard paradigm shift.
And there's a lot of things that, I just because I know you, I know that you engaged in a lot of activities, that you engaged in different things that I know you focused on to help try to find balance in between, doctor visits and surgeries and different things like that. Can you talk about some of the things that you did? I know writing a blog became a very important part of your life, and that shift I know also brought about some amazing things after things balanced back out for you.
Well, I think the gift of the diagnosis is that sense of urgency that it gives you, right? So once we all are aware that we have a finite number of grains of sand in our hourglass, to use that analogy, but when someone shows you that hourglass and you see those grains of sand ticking through there, it really does kind of snap everything into this very tight focus that, oh my God, I got so much time that I have so many things that I want to get done. So they're having that deadline. I think sometimes even in a professional sense, having a deadline changes the way you work, the way you think, how you work, what resources you use. And so I felt like that I had this constant deadline over me that, we didn't know if I was going to make it or not make it. So keeping a daily journal became, and honestly, not just a journal, but also a daily goals list. And when you're going through something like chemo and radiation, that goal might be doing something like putting up your laundry or taking a walk around the block. So, but doing very, pun intended, digestible goals, things that you could actually check off, was a big part of trying to get through that period. Thinking about it, people would say, how did you go through, that many weeks of chemo and radiation? Well, I didn't. I did one day of radiation, and then I did another day of radiation. It's the same way you would eat an elephant, one bite at a time. So breaking a day into very achievable goals was the best way for me to, number one, get things done, and number two, have that sense of accomplishment. And again, not goals like, cycle the Tour de France, but get on the bicycle and go around the block, just to set that sense of holding myself accountable, that sense of urgency, and that sense of accomplishment.
And I think one of the most amazing things, and a testament to that that practice, I know that was a big part that birthed into your book that you have, Eat Like There's No Tomorrow.
Yeah, and writing was actually my wife's idea, because I thought, who would want to read this? But it really started not for other people, it was for myself. Again, I keep using the word digest, which is, again, for someone without a stomach, maybe that's a little too tongue-in-cheek, but I had to, it's a huge thing, right? Your whole lifespan is laid out in front of you, and you have to somehow put this into a way that you can move forward, and it's overwhelming. So every day writing about what happened, even if it was a doctor visit, or what transpired that day, or little things that happened with the children, or so creating that bit of a diary or journal helped me process and keep that into focus, because it's a ginormous thing, that, hey, you're dying at that young age when I had young children. Number one, I decided, no, I'm not. I thought about it like when they said, you've got a, whatever the percent is, you've got a 10% chance of surviving. Well, I thought about a wall. Well, if you look at any given wall, it's 90% wall and 10% door. And so I thought, well, I'm going to shift my focus. Instead of thinking about the 90% chance that I'm not going to make it, I'm going to focus on that 10% door that I am going to make it. And I think a lot of that is just how you frame the situation. I know you, as the title of the podcast is ExecuBalance. In an executive situation, sometimes you are tasked with things that are larger than life. Like, how in the world am I going to be able to accomplish this? But being able to parse that down into digestible bites or chunks. so that you can see the thing as more of a attainable, and that's what I tried to do, and writing really helped me with that process.
Out of curiosity, do you go back and read any of those writings?
So yes and no. I mean, in some ways, it's inspiring to myself. Like I do a lot of sort of workshops and teaching things for folks, and oftentimes they will either read a section of that as part of the intro, or they'll play a video, and it's almost like an out-of-body experience. Like you think, God, that really is pretty awesome, to use your phrase. It's pretty impressive that I was able to get through that. And I even think, how did I do that? But in hindsight, you see it as a whole, but in the moment, you're just trying to get through that moment, So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. At some point, my writing style shifted. I started writing for myself, and then somewhere towards the end of that experience, I started writing for others. And I don't like that as much. I enjoyed when I was writing for myself more. It was more meaningful, it was more honest, and it was more cathartic for my experience. So that's kind of why I stopped doing the blog, because I realized somewhere along the way I started writing for other people, and that's not why I started it.
One more question on that, just again, from my own curiosity. Have your kids read any of those? What does that mean to them?
So, yeah, my older two. So I have 3 children, one 21, one almost 18, and one 6. The 6 is not reading it quite yet for obvious reasons. The older 2 just, I would say within the last 6 months, kind of rediscovered them. And I think they got into it from some photos, because I usually try to include some sort of a snapshot of the event. And so they were laughing at a photo of themselves in that. And them remembering the journey from their perspective was really eye-opening for me, because I knew they were scared. I didn't realize how scared they were, because we were always very open about the diagnosis, because kids are a lot smarter than you give them credit for. They know something's going on. And so we were very open and honest with them, maybe not the technical nitty-gritty, of it, but they knew that it was serious. So yeah, they have gone back and read it. And I do try to make myself laugh a lot, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it makes other people laugh. So I was proud to see that they seem to get it on multiple levels.
From that experience, what do you hope they learn as they go back and read those?
Well, I'm saying this to myself as well, that you forget the urgency of everything, right? I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm cliche man, because you learn that every cliche you've ever heard is true and accurate, but we're not guaranteed tomorrow. We're not guaranteed this evening. So I don't want them to use that as a fear thing, right? I don't want them to live in, oh my God, I shouldn't do something because what if something's going to happen? I tried to use cancer as my reason to do something, right? It became my motivation, like, what, I might not have another opportunity to do this. And so I have seen that they take that as well, that my daughter, who's about to be 18, she's professionally shot over 40 concerts, and she did it because she just asked the question. And she even said, I first kind of said, hey, can I shoot this show, knowing that the worst thing could happen is they would say no, right? But sometimes the fear of no keeps us from doing something. But she even said, well, there are times where you just did it because you thought, well, I might not have another opportunity to do it, So I think in little ways it has, I don't know to use the word inspired, but it has definitely changed their paradigm. They look at things in a different way, I think.
There's just so many meaningful bits out of all of that, of writing things down as you experience them so that you can grow. I think that's something that a habit that if I could develop more, it would help me process a day, really break things down and focus on what matters. And then I think one of the biggest things is find and hold on to a reason to do something, and let all of the reasons not to just fall through your fingertips, and only hold on to that reason to do it.
Well, if I can share something, my friend Hewitt, who happens to be sitting in the room, was with me in Ecuador on my son's 18th birthday. And we decided to climb a mountain in Ecuador. And I felt terrible. I was cold. I was miserable. I did not feel like climbing that mountain. And if I had said, you know what, I'm not doing this today, I don't think anyone would fault me because I have a lot of physical issues. I have no stomach, I have no esophagus. I think they gave me a hysterectomy. So I'm missing a lot of parts, right? So, I don't think anyone would say, oh, he couldn't climb a mountain in Ecuador today, he's not feeling well. But instead, I just thought, you know what, I'm going to do this. It's his 18th birthday, we're in Ecuador, I'm going to climb that mountain. And I didn't climb a mountain in one step. It was a whole bunch of tiny little bitty steps. And so I do try to use always, whenever my mind goes into and we all have that. I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to go read a story to my daughter right now. I'm tired. But if you can figure out a way to trick yourself or sort of, guilt yourself even at times into, you know what, I might not have another opportunity to do this, it's a powerful motivator. And I almost without exception, I'm always proud that I did that extra step.
That's great. That's awesome. That's really focusing on kind of diagnosing the cancer part of your life, but how far removed are we from that part of your life now?
I think it's always with me. So I've had about 15 surgeries in the past 16 years. I have a lot of physical reminders. Again, I think I do a lot more than an average person who's fully equipped with all of his organs, right? But there are absolutely days where I have physical impairments that, remind me that I'm not as, healthy as I would like to be or should be, or even a peer of the same age, whether it's physical. Even just trying to play tennis with my daughter, I'm not as good as I used to be. And so I have this constant reminder, and some days it does get overwhelming. Some days you start feeling there's a motivational speaker named Zig Ziglar, and he called it the Plum Party. He would say, you're having a Plum Party, Plum standing for poor little old me. And there are definitely days where you have these internal Plum parties where you're like, man, my situation is bad. But it becomes almost, if you let it becomes this negative feedback loop, right? So you have to somehow figure out a way to get out of that. And I find that usually is by doing service for others. Whether it's, I do a lot of phone mentoring with patients who are recently diagnosed or are somewhere along their gastric cancer journey, or it's doing a class with somebody. And so if I commit myself to doing something, I'm more likely to make that happen. I rarely ever cancel an event, but it kind of goes back into that. What I was saying is that finding that excuse. So if I tell you that I'm going to be here today at 10:30. Doesn't matter how poorly I feel in the morning, I'm going to do whatever I can to keep that engagement. So I think the more you can connect with other people, you sort of build your own support network in that sense,
Awesome. And then, as you said, you technically are cancer-free, but it's always with you and still dealing with the kind of the, repercussions or the outcomes of what you've had to go through. And so part of that is you've gotten an even deeper connection with food and how that plays into your health and your energy. And I'd love to talk a little bit about kind of how do you energize yourself now that you lack, as you say, the equipment that most people have. And then what are lessons that we can learn through that?
Well, I think that's, the analogy that was given to me that I tend to run with is thinking of your body like an engine. And my engine was drastically altered, right? So if I used to have a diesel engine, I now have an electric hybrid. So I do eat food, but I can't fuel this machine the way that I used to fuel this machine because I see a direct, almost immediate result. If I eat garbage, I feel like garbage. Now, the normal person, being you, that has a stomach, the stomach kind of acts as this very caustic waiting room for food. And so if you have, I don't want to call them bad food decisions, but food decisions that maybe aren't optimal to you, the stomach does a pretty good job of, the acid kind of breaks those things down. It sits, it mellows before going on to the next stage, which, stomach doesn't happen, no digestion happens in your stomach. It all happens in your intestines. The stomach just gets it ready for that. So not trying to get too technical, but for you, if you make bad food decisions, you might not feel the repercussions of that until hours later, sometimes the next day. But for me, if I eat garbage, again, if I eat greasy, fatty, overcooked, overprocessed foods, I immediately feel greasy and overcooked and overprocessed and tired and foggy-headed. And so I have this, it's almost like a dog with an invisible electric fence. Like, I hit that fence and I know it. But for a normal person, that delay kind of sometimes tricks us into thinking, oh, it wasn't the chili cheese dog. It must have been that bagel I had for breakfast made me feel bad. Well, no, it was probably the 10 beers and chili cheese dogs. So not making any assumptions. But my point being is that connection.
Your assumptions would be correct.
Well, it's not the first day I've met you. But that accountability and that connection is, I think, what most people tend to forget. Is that, we can't directly affect our genetics necessarily, or whatever environmental things we were exposed to as kids, or if your parents were smokers. There's all of these things that we can't control. The one thing we can control is our diet. I mean, exercise being a second thing, but I mean, there are certain things that every day we can kind of decide, how do I want to fuel this machine? And, if you're wanting optimal peak performance, you want to give it the best fuel. I was honored to speak at Porsche headquarters is here in Atlanta, the North American corporate Porsche, and they had me come and do a cooking demonstration for their employees. And so, taking that engine analogy a step further, I'm surrounded by $80,000 cars. And so I asked this group of executives, would you open the gas flap and pour a gallon of pancake syrup into the engine? And of course, they're all looking shocked, like, absolutely not. That engine would not run on that fuel. But you're doing that to your body every single day. But for some reason, there's this disconnect between their responsibility. And some people are like, well, they wouldn't sell it at the grocery store if it's not good for you. Oh, yes, they would. And they would sell it cheap. So, taking that step, and I don't want to take away the mystery and sort of pageantry of food. Like, it's an amazing thing, right? It's the experience. It's who you're sitting across from. It's the service, the ambiance, the who first figured out that you could eat that, or how, if you kept whipping cream, it would turn into butter. I mean, to me, food is a fascinating thing. So I hate to reduce it down to it being just a fuel. But the sooner you realize that you are responsible for how you feel every day, and you can decide every day, do I want to start my day with the right fuel to get me through that list that I made this morning of things that I need to accomplish, or do I want to feel tired and lethargic and uninspired because I had this crazy sugary breakfast or whatever? So that lands solely in your that's your responsibility, and most people forget that.
I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned too from you in the food arena is you start with some base decisions. You boil it down to food is fuel, learn a couple of things, but then there's just so much more you can stack on to make it adventurous. Some of the things that we've done with and the conversations we've had, having you come into Techwood and talk about eating healthier and looking at, we focus a lot on protein and how protein goes into your diet in different ways. And we started playing around with, at my house, and with ancient grains and different ways that we can utilize them and build better fuel to get things done. Let's talk a little bit about kind of some of the lessons and things you can teach us on how to feed our bodies with the right protein.
Well, I have to say, one of the best personally inspiring photos I ever received was when your wife, Sarah, sent me a picture of your daughter eating hummus. And not just eating, I mean him like going at that hummus.
She was going for it, man. I mean, it was a beet hummus, too.
It was a beet, exactly. So odd color, for a child. Like, so our preconceived notions, and I've heard you talk about these assumptions that we make. We assume that kids are just going to eat cheeseburgers and French fries. Well, where do they get the cheeseburgers and French fries, right? So we're putting these weird food assumptions. My mom still thinks that men have to eat meat. I'm about a 90% vegetarian. I can eat meat, but I don't get much out of it. So at a holiday, I got to get some ham so that Finn has meat. And Finn's like, I don't need meat. I think, so there are a lot of those kind of food myths that we think of. I've got to have a meat, and then I have my 2 veg or whatever it is. And honestly, if you can switch that where it's 80% veg, and if you are eating meat, let it be the 20% part, because meat might on paper have a lot of protein, but think of it as protein that's been sort of padlocked. It's very difficult to get that full nutrition out of that. Whereas, as you mentioned, ancient grains, they're high in protein, they're easy to digest. They are really, if you were to catch a human in the wild and you didn't know what does this animal eat, you would look at its digestive system, and much like many omnivores/herbivores, we have a digestive system that's not really set up for eating meat. We can, but it's not, that machine is not built or, didn't evolve to handle that. So, if we can be kind of emotionally mature enough to kind of remove ourselves from our assumptions about food and really start looking at them as, it's almost like if you're building something with Legos, you're not gonna get the weird part when you're trying to build a house. You're gonna go for these building blocks. And again, I always feel a little guilty reducing food down to those elements, but protein is so incredibly important, but there are very few foods that give us a complete protein, which means it has all of the amino acids that our body needs to repair itself, to grow, for your mind to function well. And quinoa is one of them. And quinoa is one, if you're not familiar with it, it's spelled Quinoa. It looks like quinoa. It is almost perfect human food, in that you could eat quinoa for the rest of your life as your only food. Now, you'd be bored, but you would be completely healthy. So trying to introduce foods like that as opposed to, say, white rice, which has very little nutritional value, or switching from white rice to brown rice, where you've got the complete nutrition there. So, and I know from our conversations personally, starting to read the labels on things, right? If you don't recognize it as a food, put it back. The closer you can get to the food's natural state, the better it is for you.
I'll say too, one of the things with my kids, I've realized too, the preparation and the cooking of food matters a lot too. My kids used to actually really not like broccoli. And then through our conversations, I learned I was just cooking the hell out of broccoli.
Yep.
I made it a little mushy. I made it, and it was gross. And so by just kind of more, as you say, threaten it with heat, it's crispier. And my kids actually really, really enjoy it. What are some more kind of tips? Like what's the proper way to cook a vegetable so that it's tasty and that you enjoy it and it feeds your body?
Well, we live in the South, and in the South, people genuinely cook their greens to death until they're no longer green, broccoli being one of them, Brussels sprouts. And a lot of the foods that are healthier for us have things like sulfur in them. And again, if you're from the South and if your grandmother's from the South, you've probably walked in the door and you thought, what died in this kitchen? And it's grandma cooking kale or cabbage or Brussels sprouts or broccoli to the point where they are mushy and they lack color. And there's even an expression in the South called pot liquor, and pot liquor is usually the cooking liquid that you cook those vegetables in, and oftentimes that liquid is more nutritious than the vegetable now because you've leached all of that out. So I've fallen in the same boat like you were talking about. I hated Brussels sprouts as a kid, and even though my dad was a somewhat famous chef, whenever he served us Brussels sprouts, I took them like pills. I would put a Brussels sprout in my mouth, I'd get a big swig of iced tea, and I would swallow it without even chewing it because it was so sulfurous. It was awful. So to me, it is my biggest joy, like seeing your daughter eat the hummus, when I have somebody that says, I don't like Brussels sprouts, and then or okra or broccoli or whatever, and then I present it to them in a different capacity, one that's usually more like raw, closer to raw, where, as you mentioned, I tell people I don't cook my vegetables, I just threaten them. You're getting a different textural experience, because a lot of eating is that. Like, if you don't like the texture of a food, oftentimes you're not going to eat it. So it's crunchy, it looks good on the plate, it doesn't look like a collection of beige. There's a very, I won't say the name, but there's a popular roadside country cooking chain restaurant here in the South where I always jokingly ask the waitress, are there any special beige items on the menu I should know about today? Because it's every time you order it, the starch is beige, the meat is beige, the vegetables are beige or brown. So I love to think of those vegetables in a more sort of celebratory way. So yeah, usually, I mean, if you ask for tips, I mean, that is usually my biggest tip is don't cook them so long, undercook them. And you can always cook them more. You can never uncook them. So, try it for a couple minutes. Even kale and or collard greens or mustard greens here in the South, people cook them all day. So I just do them with a little bit of olive oil, a little garlic, and I get where the oil is almost smoking hot, throw the leaves in there, turn off the heat, and just that carryover heat is enough. And I've had grannies tell me, "Oh, I thought it was poisonous unless you cooked it all day." And I'm like, "Wow, that's a." So they're not poisonous, but usually people are overcooking them.
Awesome. Hey, okra, totally another one. Just once you learn how to cook it the right way.
Yep.
I mean, fried okra is always good.
Oh yeah, I mean, listen, I am not a food snob in that. I will absolutely chow down on a plate of fried okra. I won't feel great afterwards. It's greasy, it's heavy, it sits in your system like a rock. But man, those 45 seconds of in the mouth time is fantastic. But so I'm not. I don't ever want to be perceived as a food snob. I never get asked to anyone's home for dinner because they're always like, I'm not cooking for him. I love a ham and cheese sandwich. But when I am cooking, when it's my time in the kitchen. I just try to make the best decisions. But speaking of, I think that's the other thing is we've also been talking about assumptions. People like to think of cooking time as a chore. I have switched that around, and people will ask me at a class, well, how do I do my day where I can spend less time in the kitchen? I'm looking for the opposite. How can I spend more time in the kitchen? I would rather than buying the pre-sliced, pre-chopped, I want to have that time where I put on a podcast or I put on, music, and that's sort of my time to be in that space, to be creative. And rather than dreading that, I work on my knife skills, or there's always a different way of looking in that situation. And to me, spending time either by yourself or with your kids, getting them involved. And I have pictures of Finn, who's now 6'4", standing on an apple crate, chopping okra stems off with a butter knife, so we started him in the kitchen early. So not as a career choice, but just as having him involved in that experience. And you'll find that kids who turn their nose up at vegetables, once you involve them in the selection, the preparation, the growing of, all of a sudden it's their okra, it's their tomatoes, and it's a completely different, as a parent, there is no greater joy. If you have a picky eater, I always kind of liken it to having when you go to a fast food restaurant, they give you 3 colors in a crayon set. Well, if you can now get them to like okra, well, that's a 4th color. You get them to like turmeric, that's a 5th color, or ginger or garlic. And now in life, they're going to be able to paint with an entire box of 128 crayons or an infinite number of crayons. So if you are training your child to be a picky eater, and you absolutely can affect that, the only person you're punishing is them, or they're punishing themselves by not allowing them to try things. Expand that box of crayons.
Awesome. We're coming up on kind of our time, and there's just so many things that we can learn from you and your experience. I know we've only talked, I think, about just a few of them with cancer, and the way that being focused and writing things and planning lists and realizing that all you need is one good reason to do something, and chop it down to a list, and take one step at a time to eating healthy and making better food decisions, so that then you have the energy to tackle those. Those are just some of the very valuable lessons I think you've been able to share with us today. And I think there's so many more that we can learn from you. You've done so many more things. I know right on our table here, we've got your spice line that's come out, as well as you have your book, which it's currently it's sold out, right?
Sold out. In fact, I only have 3 copies, so I stole one of the 3 kind of showcase copies to bring down here. But I desperately need to do another one. And that's kind of where I'm having a problem with balance. I was listening to your podcast, and that's the first thing that came to my mind is I am sometimes so bent on making other people happy that I forget to make myself happy. Not to set up a tangent podcast, but I'm learning that that's something I need to make more time for myself. And I think growing up in the hospitality industry, I'm always more concerned about, do you have enough coffee? Do you need anything? How's the room temperature? And I forget that I need to kind of sometimes turn that mirror around, flip it around and start thinking about that, because that's a goal that I've had for a long time. We sold through 10,000 copies relatively quickly. And while I'm proud of the book, there are a lot of things that I've learned since then. It's been a decade. So I'm desperate to get another one. I just have to learn how to say no to people asking me for help or advice or podcasts. But I've got to learn how to balance that where I can take some time for myself.
Excellent. So, if somebody wanted to find Spice Lines or even connect with you for you to come and have a conversation with them or their
Sure.
staff or anything like that, how would they go about that?
Well, I am all over social media. If you Google Chef with No Stomach, I'm the guy that pops up. Not that I'm, that's my tagline, but there aren't that many Hanses with that particular scenario. But website is hanscooks.com. I'm Hans Cooks on Instagram. I think that's what I am on Facebook too. But I'm fairly easy to find. And then I've also got the spices up on Etsy. And they're in a couple of gourmet shops in the Georgia area, North Georgia area. Or you can go to your office and we'll give directions to. We're going to set up a drive-through soon here.
Absolutely, I would say Honey Buzz is my favorite. It just goes on so many things.
Well, you were there at the inception, the creation of that. So when I was making that in 2006, 2007. When did you about 2007, somewhere in there?
Yeah, I think so.
So all the different iterations of that, I would bring them in, and all of my my coworkers at the television studio where you were, we would try it. Oh, it's too salty. It's too, it's a little too spicy, and we would eat it on bags of popcorn. And it's still fantastic on popcorn. So you had a hand in creating that one. But no, this was sort of an extension of what I do, and I kept finding myself going back to the same combinations. And finally, somebody just said, I would buy that if you would bottle that. I'm like, ding. So that opportunity sort of came to me. But I've been doing it since 2007, I think. So quite a while now. And
then also, you're on the board of the Gastric Cancer Foundation?
Gastric Cancer Foundation. I've been on there for, I guess this is my 11th year. And that started, too, out of just wanting to help people. At the time that I was diagnosed, when you Googled stomach cancer, it pretty much went straight to somebody's obituary. And let's be honest, everybody's story ends in an obituary. So I wasn't trying to avoid the eventual obituary. I just didn't want to get there that soon. But there weren't any resources out there. And so, crazy long story short, I met the founder of the Gastric Cancer Foundation, who was about my age. He's no longer with us, but he also was frustrated that there's no resource out at the time. And so he wanted to change that and reached out to me, and so I have been a part of that and still am very, very passionate about that. So I do a video series called the Gesundheit Kitchen. The word Gesundheit means health. So it's kind of meant to be the healthy kitchen. And while it was geared and initially started for gastric cancer patients, the things that I'm teaching, the sort of Lego blocks that we use in that series are absolutely pertain to anybody, whether you have a stomach, don't have a stomach. So there are some good cooking fundamentals in there, as well as some kind of funny moments, some comedy moments. We need to release the blooper reels at times. I think the whole thing is just a blooper reel. We just keep going anyway. But anyway, so if you're interested in any of the stuff that we've talked about, just go on YouTube and look up Gesundheit Kitchen or on the gastriccancer.org. We have all the videos up on there, and that's an ongoing series, and I'm proud of, because that's the number one question people ask when they get diagnosed with stomach cancer: what can I eat? Or people ask me, how do you eat without a stomach? And I'm usually with a knife and fork, unless it's a soup, and then I use a spoon. But it's a legitimate question, because I didn't know you could live without a stomach until I didn't have a stomach. Until I was thrown into the deep end of that pool. So yeah, we should have mentioned that sooner. But yeah, the Gesundheit Kitchen is an ongoing resource for anybody that's interested in that connection between what we eat and how we feel.
Awesome, thank you so much. And then I guess as we wrap up, I think one of the coolest things I know about you, Hans, that I will share and let everybody know about is you have a pretty cool tattoo on the.
Oh yeah, I forget about it because it's behind me.
Kind of like cancer now.
It's a tramp stamp. It's actually kind of a shoulder version of a tramp stamp. No. Can I say that? I did. So anyway, yeah, I never thought of myself as a tattoo person, and not that I was necessarily against them, but I also not a big fan of pain. And so I guess it was about the 5-year survivorship mark, I thought, I'm going to do this. And I thought, in for a penny, in for a pound. And so I got a big tattoo between my shoulders of a coelacanth. And a coelacanth is a fish that they thought was extinct, and they'd only seen it in fossil records until 1938. Someone caught one alive off the coast of Madagascar. And So to me, that was kind of the survivor fish. And so I had an artist friend of mine named Richard Kirk design a coelacanth tattoo, and then we sort of hid the word cancer in the scales numerically. So if you have an eagle eye, you can see number one, if you find me without a shirt, which doesn't happen too often. But anyway, I'm proud of it, and I think I want more tattoos. I mean, again, not so much as a hobby, but I do think of them as a bit of a, just like we talked about writing things down. That's me sort of writing that down, that I did this. I got past this. So I don't know where the next one's going to go, but maybe forehead. I've got a big forehead. Maybe I could rent out space to Techwood.
Yeah, we'll put a big logo there for you. Thank you so much for joining us, and I think that's kind of a good place to kind of wrap it up. I know lots of nuggets for us to take away, and I think the end game is to kind of realize that the place wherever you are, you're never too far gone to refocus and take baby steps at a time. To get yourself to a new place or to do something you've always wanted to do before and to challenge yourself. And so thank you so much for your insights and for sharing with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.